One of the biggest things we've ever lost in history has been grandmas. And I mean, it's an evolutionary fact that grandmas are one of the biggest things we've lost in history. When I was in school, evolutionary biology was one of my favorite things to study. And one of the things that was really interesting was, why do women have menopause? From an evolutionary standpoint, it doesn't really make sense. Why would you have someone live for a quarter of their life without being able to reproduce? I mean, reproduction was one of the big reasons that you exist at all, from an evolutionary standpoint. And so why would you go to a species and say, oh, you're not going to be able to reproduce? And really, there's about 3 species that do this. Every other species, you can pretty much reproduce right up until you die. So given that making life, creating life is one of the biggest and most valuable things in all of creation, but especially in evolution, why would that being removed be a good thing? Well, there's one really big specific reason, and it's grandmas. There are essentially 3 species you can think of that have menopause in their in their life cycle, and that is humans, whales, and elephants. And what we all have in common, or these 3 species have in common, is that information is incredibly important to their survival. Information is in fact so important that evolution has decided that we need to find a way of maintaining it. And this is where grandmas come in. See, what happens is childbirth is one of the riskiest things that a woman can do. Actually, any female in any species would be able to do. It's incredibly likely, or very likely, that you will die or suffer some great problem during childbirth. And so evolution was like, hey, we're going to pump the brakes because you are too valuable. You are too valuable to everyone. That we cannot risk you losing your life, trying to make children. And information was likely related to that. See, what would happen is that once women got to a certain age, they have seen a lot of the world. They have gathered a lot of information. They have a lot of wisdom to pass on. And that wisdom is so valuable that evolution essentially said, okay, stop. You're not going to have children anymore. Instead, you're going to pass that information on. You're going to help raise the next generation. You're going to help guide these individuals through everything. Now, you might go, well, what about grandpas? Grandpas exist too. It's even though men can technically reproduce all the way up to the end of their age, we actually start developing the production of oxytocin, which is supposed to counteract the testosterone and make us, fight for reproduction around the same time that women start having menopause. And there's a couple of really good reasons for that. One, grandpas are important too. Grandpas serve a really big, part of developing wisdom. But 2, if you're going to compete with a 20-year-old male, that guy's probably going to kill you if you try. So why did I start this off by saying grandmas are one of the things that we're missing and not grandparents? Grandparents definitely are a huge thing that's been missing. But from an evolutionary standpoint, grandmas consistently live way longer than grandpas do. So from an evolutionary standpoint, the value that grandmas have is been considered significantly higher than grandpas, because the life expectancy for males across these 3 species is significantly lower than females. So let's talk about what I mean by what we lost. I'm going to be very American-centric right now. Let's look at it like we think of retirement age as being in your 70s. And so when you talk about being grandparents, you'll probably be a grandparent probably around your 50s, 60s, maybe 40s, depending on how things work out. And how are you going to be able to go in and fill that role if you're consistently working to try to keep your own survival? In the past, you could think of it as we had a community. But if you wanted to go beyond just saying we had a community, we had a family, a multi-generational family set up for a very long time, where when you started having your children, your grandparents were there to start picking things up, to start helping with the little stuff, keeping them alive so that you could go out and start making some more sort of material gains, hunting, gathering, or in this case, working a job. And the grandparents were back behind, helping keep the children alive and also starting the process of, imparting their wisdom upon the children while you were out gaining your wisdom and picking things up from your grandparents. And then when they got into their 50s, 60s, 70s, this is when the children were older. They were getting into their teenage years, and they're starting to get to the point where they were going to go out on their own. And you are approaching to the point where you're not going to be able to have children anymore. And so now you have these people that are there to pretty much only impart wisdom. Physically, they're not very able to do as much. And you are starting to turn your eyes and transition to your children and be able to put some stuff in for your children. Compare that to what we have now, where when the grandparents are physically, getting to the point where they're not able to do nearly as much, now they're able to come offline and maybe kind of come in. But by that point, the children are very, very, into their own thing. And their grandchildren are close to going out on their own, don't have a great relationship or, haven't established that relationship with their grandparents. And the children had to struggle, and you'll probably have someone else go and raise their kids because they had to go out and work extra hard to be able to make sure that they could sustain the children and themselves, and maybe even the grandparents that are coming in. And this is what we've lost. This is what we've lost. And think about that as opposed to if we had a society where around the age of 55, you were going to be retiring. You're going to be in a position where you didn't have to work anymore because you had gotten enough to sustain yourself. And you were going to be able to be a part of your children's lives and your grandchildren's lives. And now the children are able to freely go do what they need to do to build their lives with their children because you are taking care of a lot of the brunt force of it. And you get to have the grandchildren. You get to impart your wisdom upon them in a way that actually is really good and meaningful. This is what we lost when we lost grandmas. This is what we lost when we lost grandparents. And if it was so important that evolution decided that this had to happen, it's a big deal.